Today, we're going to dive into a conversation on uprooting racism and creating systemic change in STEM, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's the idea that curriculum is based on educating students in these four disciplines. And for us biomimicry enthusiasts, looking to nature for inspiration to solve problems and develop innovative new designs is a critical component for furthering STEM education and reconnecting all of us to our place here on Earth. Before I introduce our special guests, I would like to acknowledge the following names of those who were killed and now serve as the inspiration for the systemic change that this moment demands. Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Sandra Bland, Tamir Rice, Trayvon Martin, Elijah McClain, Rhea Milton, Dominique Fells, among countless others that would sadly take me hours to name. Bringing us into this honest, interdisciplinary conversation on racism, being Black in the sciences, and how removing blind spots is essential for the work ahead is our expert panel of professionals working in the sciences and sustainability movement, advocating for diversity, inclusion, and making nature a safe place for all. Welcome biomimicry professional and wildlife TV host, Billy Allman. World-renowned carnivore ecologist, Dr. Wynne Grant. Ornithologist and Blackbirders Week co-founder, Karina Newsom. Engineer and entrepreneur, Erin Shepard. And acclaimed wildlife photographer, Tashalani Lassiter. Welcome everyone, and thank you for being with us here today.
All right, let's jump right in. Greetings, people of Earth. Before we get started, I'd just like to start this conversation by first answering a question we received from an audience member. The question was, is having a positive conversation better than conversations based on raw truth and facts when moving towards change? James Baldwin once said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." And we can't progress forward without allies fully understanding the true breadth and depth of the work ahead. As Black people in this country, there's no clocking out to experiencing racism and microaggressions. There's no time off from being Black in America. And we need those of you who are looking to be allies to fully be aware of the weight and depth of true allyship. I can't promise that this conversation will feel positive or optimistic, but I can promise you it will be productive and that this will be a real conversation. Biomimicry is inherently an interdisciplinary practice that intersects deep learnings from nature with every STEM-related discipline. And it is this cross-pollination that breeds and cultivates amazing new insights and perspectives and solutions. So with that in mind, I'd like to start this conversation by inviting each of the panelists to briefly share a little bit about themselves and why they are here. So let's get started. Karina, you have the mic.
All right, thanks so much, Billy. It's so great to be here with all of you. So my name is Karina Newsom, and I am currently a graduate student at Georgia Southern University, and my research focuses on avian ecology, specifically of the McGillivray's seaside sparrow, which is a small climate endangered species that lives along the coast of the Atlantic here in the US. And my previous work in wildlife conservation has been focused on zoo science. So I worked as a keeper specializing in animal care and outreach education. But what the trend has been in my work is that I am very aware of, conscious of, and committed to addressing the systemic issues that keep Black people and other people of color from entering wildlife careers, from entering the natural sciences. And so I've had the distinct honor of being able to create programming with my institutions to address those issues. And I could intend to continue doing that into the future. Thanks, Billy.
Thank you. Tashalani, why don't you take it?
Hey, so my name is Tashalani Lassiter. I'm a photographer. A lot of people say wildlife photographer. I consider myself just a photographer. I do focus on wildlife quite a bit. I love animals, bears, wolves, but I also like telling stories of people, especially like diversity stories and underrepresented people. And I've grown more passionate about it over the last couple of years. I think thanks to Ray, actually, when she reached out to me, it kind of, I don't know, maybe jump-started me into a path that I kind of wanted to be in, but I didn't really see myself in that path. And so she, she inspired me to take the next step. And now it's a big passion for me. And, I don't know, I'm gonna continue going for as long as I can.
Awesome. So actually, let's hand it off to Dr. Ray Wynne Grant.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Billy, for bringing us all here. My name is Ray Wynne Grant. I'm a large carnivore ecologist. I am currently a research fellow with National Geographic Society. I mainly study the movement and behavior of large carnivores like bears in North America and African lions in East Africa. I use a lot of different tools in terms of field work, in the field tools, as well as geospatial technology to analyze movements. And my ultimate goal is to figure out human carnivore coexistence so that we can have more people and more carnivores in shared spaces. Similarly to Karina and to Tashalani, I have been really shaken by social justice issues in my whole entire life, but especially in my recent professional life, and have begun to feel more comfortable bringing my full self to my science and to my professional work, which means that I'm infusing a lot of advocacy work into my science. So I'm excited to talk to you guys about that today.
Thank you, Ray. And last but not least, Erin.
Hey, everybody. My name is Erin Shepard. I have a bachelor's degree in biochemistry from Claflin University, and I love school so much that I decided to go back to get another degree in electrical engineering from Clemson University. I work with NASA and the South Carolina Space Grant Consortium to create biologically inspired robots for space exploration. I'm here like everybody else because I'm passionate about STEM outreach, about diversity in STEM, and I am deeply disturbed by the recent events. To be honest, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. I'm tired of being told what life means for me because I'm Black and male. I'm tired of having to reconcile my dream of touching the stars with the reality that a routine traffic stop or a concerned neighborhood watchman can bring that to an end. And because of that exhaustion, I want to be here to spark that dialogue, to put in the work, and to encourage everybody to put in the work to make systemic change.
Thank you for that, Erin. One of the reasons why we decided to name this Start Where You Are is because it's also important to start with where the experiences of Black people and other people of color presently exist. And so I just want to ground everyone in this one stat. According to the 2017 report by the NSF, 4.8% of science and engineers are Black. This means that more often than not, if you're Black in STEM, you're most likely the only Black person in a room, in a lab, on a site, or on a set. I know for me, when we were filming Little Giants for Animal Planet, without fail, in between takes, when anytime someone would see us filming shots for the show, and they would come up and ask what we were doing, they always assumed that I was part of the camera crew and not necessarily one of the stars of the television series, without fail. And it just further brings up to me the unique experience of being the only, and how people often perceive you out in these spaces. So Tashalani, I wanted to turn it over to you because you recently shared a post that I thought was incredible about your experience as a wildlife photographer. So I'd love for you to start and elaborate on that post and your experiences.
I think he might have dropped out.
Okay, we'll come back to him. Karina, actually, so great that you spoke up. You co-organized Black Birders Week and the hashtag behind it. What was your experience? What was your experience before that initiative launched, and what, especially after, do you feel like has changed, if anything?
Yeah, so my experience has been exactly what you described, Billy. I have been the only Black person in pretty much every single academic space since high school. And after a while, I essentially got used to it, and these kind of self either modifications or adjustments that I was making to maintain white comfort in my space very much became second nature, right? That's in the birding space, recreationally, or in academics. And so Black Birders Week existed. You know, we organized it around kind of in response to the situation that happened in Central Park with Christian, a birder that many of us admire. But the experience that he had rang familiar to all of us in some capacity. And so we organized that as an opportunity for us to share our stories. And what that week of just conversation with people around the world did for me is it made me even become aware and conscious of the ways in which I have adjusted my own self to maintain that white comfort that I had lost track of, that I no longer even detected that I was doing. And I was kind of overwhelmed by it for a little bit. I was shocked that I had been doing that for so long that I didn't realize it anymore, whether it be adjusting my behavior, my posture, where you can see my equipment, what I'm doing when a white person approaches me who doesn't know what I'm doing outside, all these little things. And at the same time, I realized that I wasn't alone in all of those, capacities in which I was hyper aware of my surroundings whenever white people were in my space, and finding community of people who had similar experiences to me was incredibly powerful for me. It made me feel seen, as we say, and made me recognize that I'm not alone in my experiences, and in fact have a large network of people that I don't have in my physical space, again, because many of us tend to be the only Black people in our physical space, but that there are many of us around the world from whom we can get kind of glean support in these spaces.
And I think there's something about, this idea of a community of the onlys that is in and of itself kind of very, very telling. I think we have Tashalani back. Tashalani, I don't know if you heard the question, but I was just curious if you could talk more about your experience as a wildlife photographer and what that's been like. Oh, I think you're muted.
There we go. Yeah, sorry, technical difficulties. My computer just crashed. I'm on my cell phone now, so hopefully everything is clear. I apologize.
All good.
Yeah, my post on Instagram, it was actually pretty tough for me to write, and I, to this day, haven't read through all the comments that I received. It kind of forced me to think about just everything I've dealt with in life in general. There's things where I was a kid where I just thought like, this is just how it is. This is how it is to be a Black person, a Black man. When you go into the store, you take your hands out of your pocket, you see the lights behind you, roll down the windows, put your hands on the steering wheel, turn off the car, make no move that could be deemed aggressive or anything like that. And as I'm out photographing, it's the same thing. I'm reading all the rules before I go to make sure I follow the rules. I'm always thinking I got to wear bright colors so no one mistakes me for something else and takes me out. And writing that post and just thinking about it, I realized it's not the way it should be. And I shouldn't feel like that. And I got kind of emotional. And I still do thinking about it because I'm thinking like, will I ever be free? And it kind of motivated me to do what I can so that hopefully in the future other people can feel free. I think maybe it's too late for me, 20, 30 years, maybe I won't even be out in the field anymore. But if I can do something so that the next kid doesn't feel that way, then I'll feel good about myself.
What's just kind of piggybacking up on that, what's something that you think, people have great intentions, right? Like they, even some of the misguided people who have been calling the cops on people think that they're doing right. Like what's one thing that you wish people knew when they see you out in the wild filming something? Just like, what's the smallest thing that people can do to avoid those kind of instances?
Probably they could just say hello, or start a conversation. I always find that I'm starting conversations with people rather than the other way around. A lot of people, the first the first thing I get from them is, you know, where are you from, or what are you doing here, or how long have you been doing this? And they have no idea who I am, right? They have no idea that, you know, where my pictures have been published or how much I shoot or anything, but they always look at me and they think, you know, I'm not supposed to be there. So maybe they could just say hello and, you know, maybe ask, you know, how long I've been doing it, or, you know, or something along those lines.
I think it's kind of profound how simple just say hello is as a solution, right?
Yeah.
And actually, Ray, I wanted to ask you something kind of just going off of that, in terms of like, what challenges do you think people in STEM are blind to? What does that mean for people and what does that mean for people who benefit from, you know, the current norms of America and being a professional or being a white professional?
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to really acknowledge and affirm the things that Karina and Tashalani have said so far, because they are powerful and they are emotional. And so the things that I will say right now about STEM, the STEM field and the STEM professional spaces truly apply outside of STEM professional spaces. These are my experiences in STEM, but I believe that they are not unique to any profession that we have out there. But certainly the thing that I want to drive home that you all in the audience have already heard is clearly emotional labor, right? There is so much emotional work, truly, you know, an unpaid, really energy sucking labor that Black folks have to engage in daily, moment to moment, in order to survive professional spaces, you know, meaning quite literally survive it and remain alive at the end of the day, but also to be productive in our spaces and to do a good job and to achieve. And I am, you know, this is something I'm going to say, and it's going to sound very sloppy, so I hope that no one is quoting me on this, because I would normally clean it up a little more. But I'm reminded of a time when I was a graduate student at Yale University, so a very privileged elite space that I felt very comfortable in, honestly. And I was walking from my campus back to my home, which was about a 5-minute walk, and had a really horrible interaction crossing the street where folks started hurling racial slurs at me and threatening my life and telling me to get out of there. And I got home and I was in tears, and I, you know, came back to my roommates who were also Black. And I remember saying, and this is the sloppy thing, you know, no wonder white people get such good grades. You know, they can just walk home from school. I'm going to have to figure out whether I can do my homework today or whether I am going to actually keep crying because I'm afraid and I've been violated and I'm facing hate outside of my door. And again, I would clean up that statement, but if I were to say it in that way, I hope that the magnitude is hitting people, that there is so much extra that goes into, you know, being average, let alone being exceptional, you know, or being excellent or being a leader. And that is not fair, and it's draining. And it also creates this huge divide between those of us who have the stamina, but also the resources to make it through these difficult spaces, right? So again, I am someone privileged enough to be able to seek therapy when I need it. And there's all kinds of people out there who don't have support, who don't have therapy, who don't have money for things, whatever it might be. And that's how we can really see so much division and racial disparities just come from what's outside. So again, in STEM, I truly feel that a lot of folks in professional spaces, a lot of the organizations where I've worked, think that when we arrive at work, we're all arriving to the same place. You know, maybe there's a really wonderful institutional culture. Everyone loves being at work. I've worked in places that I have loved entering the doors every day and I've felt great. But that doesn't mean that we've actually entered at an equal place. You know, how distracted am I by what's going on with me at home, what's going on with my friend Tashalani, what's going on with my dad and brother and husband and children, you know, outside of that space in terms of racial violence and threats, that doesn't actually put us in an equal place to succeed and to thrive. And making sure that all of our colleagues in these STEM spaces understand that inequalities come in through that doorway is so important to moving forward.
I think that point about emotional labor is so on point, and I think it's so central to even this conversation. There's another James Baldwin quote that I personally love, which is, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time. And for me, it speaks to exactly what you were saying. There's the level of being Black in this country. There's the level of being Black in an institution or educational institution or in an environment where you're the only one. And then there's also the level of this moment of having all of these well-intended potential allies coming and asking you for the solutions to the problems that you experience daily. And I think that's very important for people to understand. When we talk about starting where you are, it's crucial that you start with what are the questions that you are asking of your Black colleagues? What are the demands that you don't realize that you're putting on them to answer for you? A lot of people have asked me or have talked about how their colleagues ask them for resources. What should I be reading? What should I be looking at? My response is Google is your best friend. There's plenty of books, read them all, and then come back with questions versus starting with asking us to kind of do the homework for you. The analogy I've been giving is the same way that you don't like that one student who comes in during the test and asks for the questions or asks for the answers to the questions during the test, especially if you've done all of the work. That's the same thing that Black people are experiencing right now. We need you all to start with the work, start with the research. And if you have questions, it's better for us to be able to further point you in a direction, especially if you have that relationship, than starting from scratch, because that is emotionally draining as well.
Billy, you know that it's not a panel discussion if I don't jump in and interrupt somebody. So
absolutely,
forgive me. But as I was hearing you kind of reflect on what I said, I realized that I intended to mention privilege, and I'm sure that everyone in our audience, no matter who you are, you've been hearing a lot about privilege and white privilege in particular. And, I really want to sum up and make sure everyone understands that, white privilege is not to suggest that your life isn't hard. And that's something that I've really struggled with, especially in the STEM space, because doing science is really hard, right? Like being a good scientist is just hard. Take race out of the picture. It's hard to achieve in those spaces. It's hard to achieve in academia. Stuff is hard, life is hard. And so white privilege means that, things can be difficult, things can be challenging, stuff can be really, really hard, and you can have problems, but your problems aren't because of your whiteness. Right? Your problems could be because of your income, because of your background, because of your family situation, because of all kinds of things, but not because of the color of your skin. And that is a type of white privilege. All of us up here have some type of privilege, whether it is, heterosexuality, whether it is financial, whether it is coming from, a strong family background, whatever it might be. We all need to recognize how our privileges influence spaces. But in times of racial crises, it is so critical that white people understand that no matter what your problems might be or what might be difficult for you, it's not made difficult because of the color of your skin, which is so different than all of us up here.
Amen. And also to that point, y'all feel free to interrupt me. This is a conversation. I don't want to hog the mic as the moderator. That's bad moderating. But I do have a question for you, Erin. From your perspective as an engineer and entrepreneur, what do you see as step one or the first hurdle to creating systemic change in STEM?
When I think about it, I have to reflect on my own experiences growing up, in that I not only had the blessing / burden of being Black, but I also had the attribute of being a big nerd. And those two contradict each other in almost every cultural space. It was extremely tormenting as a kid when I would go outside in my neighborhood and be around the other kids who look like me, and I would get told things like, well, you're not really Black because you talk a certain way. You're not really Black because you're more interested in science than you are in sports. You're not really Black because that's not what we do. You being smart and achieving isn't what we do. And at the same time, when I would go to school, especially as I got older, I was fortunate enough for that my parents sent me to a Catholic private high school where I was, like many people here, the only one in the classroom 9 out of 10 times, and being asked questions like, well, why aren't you good at football like the other Black people in our class? And when I think about what you have to do to start systemic change in STEM, the engineer in me, I'm always looking for the root cause. And I think the root cause is doing an entire cultural overhaul on what being Black means and what are the boundaries that you can operate within as a Black person, because I shouldn't have people ask me, what sport are you playing, when I tell them, hey, I'm going to college next year. That happened, by the way. I shouldn't have people tell me that I shouldn't be the because I can add and multiply and I can talk with proper subject verb agreement. And so I think to really institute change, we have to shift our cultural perspective on what Black can do. And I think it all starts with what we see growing up at home. For me, one of my biggest decisions to go into STEM was because I saw it on TV and it looked cool. So if you put more Black faces out in the popular media, if you put more Black scientists out in front as we're solving national issues, if you show pillars and examples and avatars of what Black achievement can be, then I think you start to change STEM. If you show more students that, hey, it's okay that you want to do this because other people that look like you also do it and they can help you get there, that's where you start to create the change. Now, granted, it's a long road, but before you can take step one, you have to be motivated to take that step. And I know lots of kids, because I work with them with my company, because we're focused on doing STEM outreach and using science as a tool to inspire. And I know lots of kids who say, well, I can't do science. And when you ask them why, it's because, well, that's not what people around me do. And so again, I think it's creating those, lost for words here. It's unshackling those bounds of what Black means. Black should not mean that I can only be a rapper, an athlete, or an entertainer. Because white kids grow up and they're not automatically typecast into 2 or 3 career fields. The world is theirs. Other kids grow up that way too. But when you grow up Black and you show an interest in science, it's almost a taboo, and it creates a cultural battle from both sides. You get it from the white students that you see or the white people that you interact with, but then you also get it at home within your own culture. And that's just because over the years we've created these bounds of what Black means. And so again, I think we just have to unshackle that Black people can't do certain things. Like what makes us less qualified to be great scientists or engineers? So yeah.
So I want to dive a little bit deeper into that, and Karina, I'm going to throw this to you, and then actually Karina and Ray, I want to get your takes on this, because I think one of the things that I feel like I heard in what you just said was the idea of exposure, right, and how it's a double-sided coin, right, in that there's the exposure of providing more exposure for Black youth, but there's also exposing, white people or non-Black people to the idea that Black people are just as much interested in everything that a white person is interested in. We have a lot of educators that have registered and are listening. And one question that we get a lot is, how do we get Black students more interested in STEM? And I think that the question is inherently flawed. I think that Black people are just as much interested in STEM as anyone else. But I don't think that the pedagogy of STEM is necessarily inclusive or inviting us into those conversations. So everyone tends to flock to what is relevant to them or where they feel invited. And I just wanted you all to speak to that in particular, because I know that Ray, I know your story of growing up in kind of an urban setting, and Karina, I see the work that you're doing out in the field, literally out in the field in Georgia. And can you all just speak to, what you think of the question and what you think the answer actually is?
Yeah, so Billy, the first thing I thought of when you said that was a woman who I greatly look up to. Her name is Dr. Danielle Lee, who is a biologist who studies small mammals, right? She's phenomenal. And she gave generously of her time and her thoughts and like shared, I mean, she always does. There's this one very incredible video that she posted to social media, and a phrase that she said was that you need to interrogate the canon in STEM, which is so meaningful and kind of gets to the point that you were saying, Billy, because a lot, like the way that we learn, the way that we're taught, the subject matter that we learn is completely Eurocentric. Like from the history to the actual science, it's incredibly Eurocentric. And so we are erased from the story from jump, And so if we don't even see ourselves in the story of science, in the story of exploration, of discovery, it's excluding us before we even get to be, in a high ranking position someday as a professor or whatever it might be. And so one of the actually like concrete solutions she said is like every academic institution dedicate time with your faculty, with your, the people who work, your staff, to figure out the ways in which your pedagogy, your teaching materials, the way that you are conveying information is Eurocentric. And so I think that, as you said, that question is a reflection of the fact that it's a Eurocentric system. And so that combined with what Erin was saying, like the power of representation, just not seeing yourself visibly or seeing yourself in the story can be incredibly limiting.
That was awesome, Karina. And I will follow up just to say, I know about a few of us. I'm not positive about Billy and Erin, but I would take a wild guess to say that all of us on this panel are products of inner city public school systems. And so because of that, like we're all still in, leaders in the natural sciences in some way, or nature and naturalism. And that wasn't magic, right? That was because I think every single one of us can say at a young age, we were really interested in science or the outdoors or nature. And, Karina took the words out of my mouth, Billy took the words out of my mouth. There's been so much research done on girls and how girls kind of fall off, wanting to be in STEM. They start really strong, and then along their journey into adolescence and to those teenage years, they become less interested or they drop out. It's very, very similar with Black folks, right? So if you were to just survey who's interested in STEM, or science in some way at a young age, it's equal across races, and then it changes drastically. So if that tells you anything, it tells you that society is changing the minds of kids, not what's inherent in Black cultures. And so, investigate that, do that. There's so much onus that needs to be placed on teachers, but also so much that just needs to be put on wider society. Something that I personally feel, again, goes back to what I said in my first answer to the earlier question, which is about distractions. So I have often felt, like you might see a lot of more Black faces, not a lot, but more Black faces in the medical sciences, right? So when Black folks get to college, we are more inclined to go into a pre-med track than other sciences. I have always felt strongly, and this is just my opinion, that when you have so many distractions based in racism, it's really hard to take the time to get your brain to think, well, what aspect of STEM is most appealing to me? Is it environmental science, physics? Is it neuroscience? That is not necessarily available to you when survival is actually at the forefront of your mind all the time. When, like Karina and Tashalani noted, that they are constantly having to monitor themselves and adjust their own behaviors to center white comfort, no matter where they are, whether they're driving their car, whether they're at the pharmacy, or whether they're in their professional or academic spaces. So when Tashalani said, will I ever be free? That's also a part of it. Will I ever be free to make choices for myself based on a place of tremendous opportunity because my mind is free to think about what's most important to me? I think that falls off at a really young age for Black students. And I've been told that we're not supposed to look at the chat, but the chat is on fire in this panel. And every so often something pops up where teachers are saying, I refer to my students as dreamers, or I refer to all my students as scholars, in this way. I certainly encourage that. I'm not an early childhood professional, but I do think that language goes a really long way. I distinctly remember being 25 years old the first time I heard someone else refer to me as a scientist. I was already in a PhD program. I already had a master's degree. I already had a bachelor's degree. I'd already been collaring lions in Africa. And I remember being 25 and there was a white professor who introduced me to another professor as an ecologist. And I wasn't even referring to myself in that way. And I remember having that imposter syndrome and thinking, what? I'm not an ecologist. No, I don't have my PhD yet, so I must not be. But her naming it, her acknowledging my work and my expertise and where I was in that placement changed everything for me. And I was old. So, doing that at much younger ages, just giving that type of encouragement, I think is a really great first step, but there's a lot of societal steps that also need to take place.
I think that's important too. Tashalani, I have a question for you in a moment. One thing with the language part that I think is important in biomimicry, there's this idea of being locally attuned and responsive. And I think in terms of, the curriculum that you're offering, you want to make sure that you can change it enough to the language of your students. I think that's very important. And also being cognizant of how you think you're supporting your students versus how you're actually executing that. I know that a lot of people have had these moments come up recently where a colleague or a teacher thought that they were supporting them by putting them on the spotlight to their entire team or group of students, thinking that just saying, well, what do you think about this is the right way to amplify their voice and platform, when all you're doing is putting the pressure of the collective Black consciousness to answer these questions for your students on them, which again is more emotional labor.
And I have to jump in again. Forgive me, Billy, forgive me, you guys. But I do want to also suggest that for educators who are dealing with young people, to also remain really agile and fluid and flexible with your definitions, right? So Erin gave his account of being classified as, an athlete. When people saw him in academic spaces, he must be an athlete. But making sure that you're not also suggesting to your young people that you're either a scientist or an athlete, or a rapper or a whatever, so like some of us on this panel are musicians, like some of us on this panel only listen to hip hop and go to the club on the weekends. And that does not detract from our scholarship or our worthiness in academic spaces. So allowing Black folks that freedom, again, to be our true selves, doesn't mean we must detach from elements of our culture that are important to us. We all find comfort in different elements of traditional Black culture, and some of us reject parts of traditional Black culture, and that's okay. But making sure that, by calling your student a scholar, which I think is a great idea, you're not also saying, but hanging out on the sidewalk after school with your friends and playing cards is not being a scholar. Because all of these spaces, you're showing up Black in every space, and it's all worthy. And making sure that in STEM, we're encouraging people, not just Black people, but for the sake of this conversation, Black folks, to bring their full selves to the table is also justice work.
Absolutely. Got to watch out for those respectability politics. I think that's so important. Tashalani, you actually had an interesting career change within STEM. going from working in tech to focusing on wildlife photography. What do you think individual educators can do to get more Black kids that are already interested in STEM more engaged?
For me, what I wish going back is, when I was a kid, actually, I wanted to be a marine biologist. I probably gave that up when I was, 14, 15 years old. But the reason I gave it up is because I had no idea how to get there. And there was nobody for me to talk to about, or, to teach me about the path that I should take. What classes should I take, or are there grants out there I could apply for? Are there mentors that'd be interested in helping me? And so I think, one of the biggest things that they could do is to just help kids explain how to get where they want to be. I mean, they always tell us, yeah, you could be an astronaut if you wanted to be. But to this day, I don't know how I would be an astronaut, and they definitely weren't telling me that. They were saying like, yeah, you're Black, but you could be anything that you want to be. But no one tells you, from A to Z, what are the steps to get there? And, you see someone that does make it one day, but you have no idea how they get there. And so, they could also share those stories of the people that do make it more, I think. And maybe more programs, maybe more speakers that represent, Black people, maybe bring in more people that we can connect with internships or opportunities, and just more guidance through how we're supposed to navigate from like a low income neighborhood, and how we're supposed to get to this privileged space that we all eventually want to get to.
That's great. I have a kind of a follow-up question for more of a top tier level for Erin and Ray. Erin, Ray, and Karina, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well. From an institutional or top level, what do you think are the more systemic solutions that key decision makers of STEM-based institutes and organizations can do to create systemic change? Like, what do you think the decision makers, the people who have the power to say, yes, do this, yes, do that? For me, funding comes to mind, but I want to get everyone's take on that.
Yeah, I think the most important thing, from my personal experience, is the creation of a safe space within those institutes for your students that are Black. If the topic of the day is Black students, but any form of minority in STEM, so Black, female, low income, but especially Black. I say this because recently, my company, we were out mentoring students, and we met this young lady. She was 19 years old, and we were talking to her, and we asked her, well, what do you study? And she said, oh, I'm studying this biology or something. And I said, oh, okay. And then she said, well, I really wanted to do robotics, but she then went into the story on her high school robotics team. She was the only Black female on our high school robotics team, and some of the guys on our team who were white males were giving her a really hard time. Like, they were questioning her ability. They were handing her low-level tasks and telling her, well, you can't do the programming because you don't know it like we know it, things like that. And I got enraged because A, I really like robots, and B, I really like robots, and to see somebody go away from that because of a bad experience, basically being bullied by a group of teenage white males who don't know anything, is just disturbing to me. And I think had she had that safe space in her institution, where you could talk to teachers, older students who've been around the block, somebody like me who I not to toot my own horn, but I've done robotics at a high level. And so for me, my instinct would be to come in and check those students who were giving that young lady a hard time. But because you don't have that safe space, you don't have those resources to go to, that knowledge to lean on, this young lady changed her entire career path. And that just really makes me sad. So I think for an institution, the ability to, you can't just throw money blindly at a problem. That's not going to fix it. But constructively saying, okay, we're going to create this program where the students who are interested, the students who are of color or who are minorities in STEM can go here, and they can network with these professors, and we'll add services, we'll do seminars, things like that. But just having that safe space again to be and to grow and to process the problems that you see in STEM, because let's be real, as a minority in STEM, you're going to run into problems. It's already hard as is, like everybody said, but you now have the extra burden of being Black or being female or being some other form of a minority, and having the place to go to at least process that and to recharge you and to give you solutions to deal with that from experience, I think is what gets people through STEM programs and out into the field and out contributing to greater society.
Karina and Ray, I want to get your thoughts on that as well.
I used to be really shy about the idea of saying give money to Black students until recently, and it's like, no, like that's a really important thing. And one of the things that Danielle Lee, again, Dr. Danielle Lee, who I greatly admire, has been like suggesting and saying for a while is like pay for societal memberships of Black students in academia. One of the really tangible ways that impacted me is recently I was like, working on my resume for a potential job, and I realized that my membership had expired at several, I guess, societies that are relevant to me and to my career. I didn't have the money to renew those memberships, right? And to me, it's like, I need these active memberships on my resume to look like I care about this issue and about this topic, but I can't afford to renew these memberships. And then all of a sudden, a lot of Bird societies started giving out memberships to Black scholars. And I took advantage of all of those. And now on my resume, I have that listed. Now I have access to educational resources, to literature, to science that otherwise I would not be able to see because a lot of science is behind paywalls, et cetera. I also have access now to apply for different grants, to contribute my thoughts to the institution, to sit on different committees. And so just money alone, not all Black students are poor, not all white students are rich, but the way that systemic racism works is that a lot of, the economics of redlining and the economics of racism falls along racial lines, surprise. And so a lot of times you have Black students who are disenfranchised economically because of systemic racism. And that is a way to address a very tangible and real barrier that has been in existence for many Black people, including myself. So I know exactly how powerful putting money to those initiatives can be.
I love that. These answers so far have just been taking my words. So I think this allows me to be fairly concise. When it comes to leadership, and I often find that I have two things to say, because I often find that I am fairly vocal in my places of work, especially to the executives in these spaces. So the first thing I really hope everyone hears very, very clearly, it's to take the word equity very seriously. So most of our organizations, I would bet, have task forces or committees that address diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I often worry that folks don't really understand what equity means, because when an institution embraces equity and makes a commitment to it, that is an extremely radical concept, right? We're not talking about equality, which is not a radical concept. That's just morally the right thing, right? Treating everyone equal. But equity is making up for the past in real ways, acknowledging it, and then pushing some people forward ahead of other people, whether financially, whether in terms of promotions, whether in terms of opportunity, because of historical barriers. And so I get really nervous, and every institution that I work with has some type of equity statement or task force or group, but I have not seen an organization that actually follows up on the equity part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I believe in it. I think a lot of us do, but in terms of leadership, if you're a CEO, if you're a director, really doing your research into what equity means, what equity in terms of Black Americans and professional spaces could mean at your organization, can set your leadership apart by leaps and bounds, and can change lives, can change narratives, and can change trajectories of tons of people. Especially if you're at a mission-driven organization, you are going to better achieve your mission if you actually follow up on your social justice commitments. So that is something that I want to just put out there. Everyone Google the word equity, just make sure you have a firm understanding of what it means before your organization commits to it. The second thing I'll say is probably more realistic for everyone right now, and that is just making sure that the Black people in your institution are not penalized for their justice or anti-racism work. Right. So we've seen, I mean, Harvard Business Review has all the studies. If you can afford access to Harvard Business Review, I recommend reading about their diversity studies that they've done. They've shown that when white people, especially white men, do any type of advocacy for people of color in the workplace, they become advantaged in the workplace, right? It's seen in a really, really wonderful light, and they become more trustworthy and all kinds of great things. And when Black folks, especially Black women, contribute to anti-racism work in the workplace, even if they're asked to do it, even if it's part of their job, they actually suffer professional consequences from doing that work. There's a real professional, let alone social cost in the workplace for that. So making sure that you are never, literally or subtly penalizing Black people for caring about these social justice issues is really important. You might notice that none of us on this panel work for the Biomimicry Institute. It might not necessarily feel safe for us to have these conversations so publicly and so aggressively in our spaces of work, because it's not seen as kind of being a team player. But if we were white faces having these conversations, fighting for justice and equity, it would actually be seen as leadership potential. So those are that, when it comes to like executive level, leadership thinking, it's really, really important. Equity, and then, support for people who are doing this work and having these conversations.
And one thing I wanted to add, Billy, real fast, Ray, what I thought of was equity work is not making up for shortcomings of Black people or other marginalized people. It's making up for the shortcomings of the institution, and to make sure you maintain that perspective when doing that work.
So actually, I think that's we're about to start wrapping up, and I think that's actually the greatest point that we could end on. One thing, as a biomimicry professional, when I think of how we look to models in nature for a lot of insight and guidance, two things come to mind. One being how, especially when we talk about equity right now in ecosystems, decomposers have a great role to play. And I think we're seeing a lot of the initial steps of kind of the beginning of decomposing white supremacy. When I think of people literally taking down statues and removing the prominence of historical figures, I think this idea of digesting white supremacy, decomposing it, is something that's taking place right now. But the one thing that people forget about decomposers is that they're also producers as well. They don't just take things down, they don't just break them down, but they transform them into nutrients. And that is the part, that's the equity part. So as you're looking at how do we take down these monuments, how do we remove these elements from our classrooms, you also want to be cognizant of how are we turning this into a nutrient that rebuilds this community. The other thought, for those of you who are looking for a metaphor around white supremacy, I don't think you have to look any further than coral reefs and coral bleaching. When you think about what is happening in coral bleaching, it's literally a toxic environment that has been produced through long periods of illicit behavior, creating such a bad environment that a partnership is not allowed to take place that benefits the entire ocean. So when you see coral bleaching, you are seeing the effects of white supremacy that live and are prevalent in every stage of American and global society for that matter. So I just wanted to leave you with those two thoughts. There's a lot of work ahead. The important part is to start where you are, which is the hardest part. But I believe that with conversations like this, So grateful to the Biomimicry Institute for putting this on. I'm going to turn this over to Lex, but thank you all. Thanks our illustrious panelists. Can't wait to see you guys again next. And thank you all for tuning in. More to come. Stay tuned. Lex, you have the floor.
Wow. Thank you to our amazing panel for sharing these lessons from the field and offering real, honest dialogue for us not only to reflect, but to act on. Each of your lights are so bright, and based on the comments here in the chat, we all have been able to feel your personal stories. And I know I'm not the only one here today walking away inspired and ready to confront real biases and play a role in the systemic change needed. We will share all the panelists' social handles and resources with the community so everyone can continue to follow your work. And we have a lot of work ahead, and we need each member of our community to do their part. As Billy eloquently said, practicing biomimicry is functional, it's interdisciplinary, and it's an approach to bring everyone together to decompose this old waste and regenerate new life. We need to do more in naturalizing diversity and inclusion in this field and beyond to truly be successful as a society. Here at the Biomimicry Institute, we are listening and learning and creating change from within. Despite many challenges, Black scientists have made important contributions to science throughout history, and they deserve our recognition in this space and across our educational programs. For example, Alice Augusta Ball, a chemist who developed the leading treatment for leprosy in the early 20th century. Marie Maynard Daly, the first African-American woman to earn a PhD in chemistry. Jewel Plummer Cobb, a cell biologist and cancer researcher who in later years became a college president. Percy LaVon Julian, a chemist who synthesized cortisone and became one of the first African-American millionaires. And Benjamin Banneker, a leading figure in science and agriculture in the 18th century, truly a founding father of American science. These are names we don't know because segregation and racist attitudes in science limited their opportunities or actively kept them from following their scientific interests and making the contributions they had to share with the world. We're committed to featuring more Black scientists, educators, and innovators in the space, and are also looking for contributors to our blog, Asking Nature, to share more diverse perspectives. It's known that the environmental impacts and social impacts are disproportionate for people of color in poverty-stricken communities. As an organization committed to sustainability, we must lift up the most neglected parts of society, and this is the why behind what we will take in during our organization's diversity training coming later this month. So we really know how to bring in the equity, as Ray excellently called out. We're excited to announce that we currently have 2 board seats open and are actively recruiting new members to join our board of directors. If you feel passionately about this work and want to get involved, please contact us at hello@biomimicry.org. Likewise, we're seeking a director of youth education to help us grow our youth design challenge and other education initiatives. We'll dive deeper into this STEM-based program, along with other ways to make nature and science fun and empowering for K-12 students during August Fireside Chat, which will be announced next week. The conversation continues from here, and we all must get to work. As Dr. Anita Mosby Tyler wisely said, justice counts on all of us. Thank you for being here with us today, and a big special thank you to Billy, Karina, Tashalani, Ray, and Erin.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See y'all on Instagram.